Hello, today I want to talk about extreme case sampling, which is the fast path to understanding astrology. So extreme case sampling is a research method for getting information, but don't run away. This may become my least popular video I've ever made because, yes, this has something to do with research methods, which is related to statistics, and I think the word statistics puts a lot of people to sleep as one of the most boring topics, but I don't think this will be boring, so don't run away. And also, if you came into this video as a research methodologist with no interest in astrology, stick around. I think you'll find this interesting as well. So this should be interesting both for research methodologists and for astrologers. So I hope you're still here. You haven't run away already. Okay. Well, how do we do research in astrology? I'm asking a question in research methodology. What is the best way to go about researching astrology? This is something that research methodologists do. They look at a particular problem and they come up with a design, a plan, a strategy for how to get information. So here's the deal with astrology. We could call astrology a fringe theory, or you might call it a new paradigm or an alternative paradigm field. It obviously doesn't exist within the mainframe of the usual kinds of things that are studied in academia, for example. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing about astrology is that there are a huge number of theories. If you're not an astrologer, you may think astrology is, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. The theories go on forever and ever and ever. Okay, a third thing about astrology is, to date, so far, there really aren't any consistent and easily replicable studies that show a measurable effect. That Gemini talks more than other signs, or, some kind of measurable effect. There are impressive studies, but nothing that's, rock solid and easily replicable. So, given some of these basic ideas of the field, what would a research methodologist say about the best way to study astrology and similar areas? Okay, well, the best method is going to depend a little bit more on exactly what kind of astrologer you are, or what system of astrology you're following, and what philosophy you have about astrology. So I've come up with 4 different kinds of methods depending on 4 different beliefs about astrology. Number 1, if you think astrology gives meaning but not measurable effects, then you don't want to do quantitative research. You want to do qualitative research, things like case studies. So some astrologers don't think that Gemini talks more than other signs, or don't think that Sagittarius travels more than other signs, don't think that Capricorn is more inclined to business than other zodiac signs, etc. Don't think Mars, Uranus aspects actually make you more dynamic or impatient, or something that you could measure, you could see with your eyes. If astrology is more about the meaning in your life and not measurement, well, then you don't do quantitative studies. And there are some astrologers who, believe that. So whenever you do research, it's going to depend on your assumptions. You don't do research, just in a vacuum. How you approach research depends on how you look at the problem. It depends on your beliefs about it. Okay, now let's assume you think astrology can have some effect that you can see. Well, then I have 3 more ways of doing research. One is, if you're an astrologer and you think you know what works, like Sagittarians travel more than other signs, or Mars Uranus people are more aggressive, this isn't just some touchy-feely, psychobabble thing, astrology really works, and I know some formulas that work, well, then you should do a hypothesis test, where you collect, this is sort of classic research as we think of it. You collect data, or maybe the data is already collected. You state what you expect to see in the data. You confirm whether it's there. and then you get more data and you replicate it again, and you do a hypothesis test, and that's sort of the ultimate scientific end game. But not all research is about the scientific end game. Sometimes you have to take little steps to get there. Now, suppose, on the other hand, I'm up to research method number 3, that you think the relationship of astrological variables to human behavior is reasonably straightforward, but you don't know exactly what the formula is, and you can't, not only not exactly, you're not really that sure how it works. You want to be a little more open-ended about it. You're not ready to do a hypothesis test. By astrological variables, we just mean things like sun signs and aspects and so on. So in this case, where you're not so sure, but you think the relationship is straightforward, which I will explain the word straightforward on the next slide, then extreme case sampling and univariate exploratory research. And I'll explain all these fancy terms in a second. And extreme case sampling has some huge advantages. It's relatively simple, easy, and provides new insights. And as we're going to see, this is the method that I think is very often the best method for astrological research, because I think most astrologers think astrology does have measurable effects. We've done lots of hypothesis, we meaning astrologers have done hypothesis tests in the past. It hasn't worked out that well. Nothing's been clearly found. I think most astrologers would like to have some flexibility and do a little bit more on an exploratory level first, before doing hypothesis tests. It's just the stage of research. And, everybody's different, but for a great many astrologers, I think extreme case sampling, it is fantastic. It's the way, man. It's just great stuff. Now, number 4 is, if you think the relationship of astrological variables to human behavior is complex, I'll explain what I mean by complex, then extreme case sampling isn't going to work so well, and things like data mining methods will work better. Okay, let me explain what I mean by simple and complex, and then we'll get on to some interesting things. Hope I'm not losing anybody too soon here. Simple relationship, I'll give you 3 criteria for what makes a simple relationship between the astrology, the astrological variables, between the astrology and the behavior. We'll just call it that, between the astrology and behavior. If the relationship is fairly simple, we can use things like extreme case sampling, and we can also do simple exploratory research, what we call univariate, which basically means you can look at one variable or a few variables at a time. Okay, here's the deal. If you're an astrologer, I have a question for you. I have 3 questions for you, and you can answer yes or no. First question, do you think that when the astrological variable is stronger, it has a stronger effect? For example, suppose all 5 inner planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, in astrology we call Sun and Moon planets, obviously they're not planets, but suppose you have Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars all in Gemini. Do you feel like that's more Gemini than if only 3 planets were in Gemini? Or do you think you could weight them? I don't mean exactly, but I mean just like ballpark it, just approximately. Like if you gave 5 points to Sun, Moon, or Ascendant in Gemini, and maybe 3 points to Mercury and Venus or Mars, or however many points you could give points to ruler of the Ascendant, whatever you want to do, could you get some very rough approximation of how much Gemini a person has? And I think the answer for most astrologers is yes. Let me give you an example. Here's Steffi Graf, one of the best tennis players of all time. Now, she's an extreme person because she's, one of the best women tennis players of all time. That makes her pretty extreme, in regards to that. Maybe a lot of us are extreme in regards to some particular thing. So she's extreme in terms of tennis performance, one of the best ever. She also has an extreme Gemini, super extreme. She's triple Gemini, and the ruler in Gemini. She has Gemini rising, Sun in Gemini, Moon in Gemini, Mercury in Gemini. Mercury rules Gemini. So, her time is from a birth certificate. So, you can't get much more Gemini than that. She's like Miss Gemini. Now, some of you are noticing this Gemini is in the 12th house. We haven't have Koch houses, but by almost any house system, or most house systems, all three of these would be in the 12th house. Maybe that tones down the Gemini. So you might want to have some, additional rules. If you use whole sign houses, then these are all in the first house. And so there's basically no way out of it if you use whole sign houses. She is Miss Gemini. And if you're going to say this 12th house tones down the Gemini, then you'd have to, establish that as a basic rule. My point is this: if we take extreme charts or extreme people, extreme meaning just tons of it. This is extreme Gemini. She should be an extreme Gemini. Well, she is well known, especially during her career, that she was not talkative, she was not a social butterfly, etc., etc. So she doesn't exhibit a lot of the Gemini characteristics. So my point is simple. We must be able to explain Steffi Graf. She's more important than most other people in regards to Gemini because she's an extreme case. So extreme case sampling is very important, and I'm going to tell you why it's so important in a second. Whoops, pulling up the wrong thing here. Where's my... There it is. Okay, so number one, I think most of us agree with. Number two, do you think that people with an extreme behavior have the same astrological influences or variables, whatever you want to call them, as people with less extreme behavior? Let me give you an example. Suppose that the best baseball players have Mars-Uranus aspects, Mars trine Uranus or something. But very good baseball players, ones who maybe made it to the major leagues but didn't excel, maybe they don't have Mars-Uranus. Maybe you believe that Mars-Jupiter is good for maybe just barely making it to the pro level, professional level, but to be an all-star player, one of the best, you have to have Mars-Uranus instead of Mars-Jupiter. So if you think that different astrological variables give you different levels of intensity or inclination to a certain area, then you really can't use extreme case sampling, because what you're saying is that Mars-Uranus is only good for the very best baseball players. And that becomes very difficult to get enough data to support it, to make a strong case for it. It may be true, but in that case, you can't use extreme case sampling because it doesn't generalize to anything else. Now, I think that probably most astrologers, including myself, tend to think that if you have Mars-Uranus, you're dynamic, you're fast, and I would expect the very best baseball players, to have just a lot of this kind of energy, or maybe boxers or football players or somebody, action people would have these Mars-Uranus aspects. And if you made it to the major leagues, my goodness, that's pretty incredible. I just think it would apply to everybody. So, in other words, if you think different astrological factors are involved at every different level of skill, then you can't use extreme case sampling. That would be a very complicated model, complicated theory. I don't believe that that's the case, and so I'm happy to use extreme case sampling. So one thing about research methodology that makes you think clearly about how do you think astrology works. And if you think it might be fairly simple in the sense that you don't have to have different astrological variables for different levels of skill, you can use extreme case sampling to perhaps make a breakthrough. Now, it may be true in some areas but not in others. For example, I have a suspicion that if we take the greatest scientists like Einstein and Max Planck and other people like that, they may have different astrological things going on than most university mathematicians and physicists. Their brain seems to maybe work differently from other people who excel in those fields, whereas I suspect in athletics it's more continuous. Now these are hunches, they're beliefs, they're assumptions. One of the things about research is you start off with guessing. You just make guesses. So And then, based on those assumptions, you develop your research models. Okay. Okay, so third thing is, if you think your astrological variables have a lot of interactions and clustering, then extreme case sampling can become more difficult. It gets harder to find out what's going on. So, for example, at the bottom here, I said, suppose that Mars-Uranus aspects give baseball talent if most planets are in air signs, but if you have most planets in fire signs, it actually hurts your ability to excel in baseball. So in other words, one astrological variable is synergistic, works together with another one, but they fight each other in another case. So maybe if you have a lot of fire, you're already so hyped up and active, the Mars-Uranus makes you too active, and you can't perform well. I'm just making up ideas. And here's another example: air signs in Mars-Uranus, or earth signs in Mars-Jupiter, or water signs in Mars-Saturn, or fire signs in Mars-Neptune. So if you think there's all kinds of different clusters of combinations of astrological variables that lead to something, it's harder to find, one simple consistent theme. Although in your extreme case sampling, you could maybe notice the different types. Now, if there are a few different types, fine. I mean, it's not like every baseball player has to have one signature. There could be several different combinations of factors that do lead to to excellence in baseball. So you can have some of this and still use extreme case sampling. But if it gets carried to an extreme where every baseball player has his own configuration that makes him so great, and there's no consistency across different people, well then, you have a mess. I mean, you don't have any simple ideas about what really causes baseball excellence. But if you can narrow it down to a few, then you can look for those patterns. I think it's pretty reasonable to suspect that there'd be a few basic different things that could lead to any particular talent. Okay, so to summarize, that's what I mean by simple relationships, not some crazy thing where as you get better, I've heard astrologers say, well, if you have everything in Gemini, then suddenly the Gemini disappears. It becomes weaker. It's what we call a non-linear relationship. Anyway, those things make it more difficult to do things like extreme case sampling and get good results. So, the bottom line is this. I think that the assumptions most astrologers have, that I think things should work, we can pick out a few extreme cases, and we can answer questions like this. At the bottom I say here, what is the effect of Chiron? Is Chiron the wounded healer? Can we demonstrate that? Do an extreme case sampling study and you'll get an answer. That's what I'm saying. What about the meaning of these new objects that have been found, Sedna and Eris? What is the meaning of a Mars-Neptune aspect or any other aspect? What is the meaning of planets out of bounds? Whatever question you have in astrology, I am suggesting that use extreme case sampling and you will get the answer much faster than almost any other method. And then, from the extreme case sampling, you can develop clear ideas about what a Mars-Neptune aspect does or what an out-of-bounds planet does. You can verify what you think it does very quickly, very easily, relative to other methods, and much more clearly. And this can lead to a hypothesis test later. Now let me show you why extreme case sampling is so important. The reason is, from the point of view of statistics, is that when you look at the relationship, say strength of Chiron in a chart. Suppose somebody has Sun conjunct Chiron with a 1 minute orb, like Doris Day, the actor and actress and singer, has Sun conjunct Chiron. I think it's 1 minute orb. It's really within a few minutes. She's an extremely strong Chiron to be so closely conjunct her Sun. Whatever Chiron does to somebody should have a huge impact. So she's on this extreme level. So this is strength of Chiron, or say Sun Chiron specifically. Doris Day would be the extreme, and she's the most important person, therefore, for understanding Chiron, because she's at this extreme, and whatever trait, whatever characteristic, whatever possibilities Chiron gives, she must be at the top. I mean, it's simple what I'm saying, but we don't do this in astrology. We don't put, generally we don't say that whatever Doris Day, whatever traits she has, in some way she must exhibit the trait of Chiron because she's an extreme. And here's the conclusion I put in bold blue at the bottom. If extreme cases fit the model, in other words, if you think Chiron is the wounded healer, then Doris Day must in some way be a wounded healer. Actually, it works pretty well. She went through all kinds of difficulty and came out pretty strong through it all. So, it works pretty well in this case. So if extreme cases fit the model is likely to, good chance the model works. If the extreme cases do not fit the model is not likely to work. By work, I mean it doesn't fit the data, the idea is wrong. So extreme cases are control. This is basically what we call in statistics a regression model. The stronger the astrological variable, we expect the trait to be stronger, and any statistician will tell you that when you have a regression model, the extreme cases control the relationship very strongly. You have to get these extreme cases correct for the model to fit. It's kind of intuitively obvious, but it's really, really, I can hardly exaggerate how powerful this is. So therefore, we go back to Steffi Graf, she must fit whatever Gemini says, because if she doesn't fit it, our ideas of what Gemini is supposed to mean just really are not likely to fit data. We don't have to collect 1,000 Gemini charts. We don't have to, bang our heads against the wall and collect more and more data. We just have to fit the extreme cases, and then we have at least a viable idea that we could apply. It's that simple. It's really, really that simple. It's true from the point of view of statistics in regression models, which is what we're really talking about here, underneath it all. And not only that, we have all the tools in astrology to do extreme case studies. Do we have a way to obtain extreme case samples? Sure, we have databases of charts, and we can pull out the people with all the Gemini, for example, based on the astrological variable. There's two kinds of extreme cases, by the way, two completely different kinds. Extreme case based on the astrology and extreme case based on the behavior. Can we pick extreme behavior? Sure, we can take the best tennis player, the most extreme whatever, if we have the birth data, and we can study those charts. Can we set a criterion for what is an extreme case? Sure, we can do that. We can say you have to have sun, moon, and ascendant in a sign, or the rising, the ruler, and they can't be in the 12th house. And therefore we could say, Steffi does not fit the formula. We can set our criteria and we can give points, and we can weight these things. Is the data gathered independently of the search for the astrological predictors? Yes, the data is already collected, so there's, in what we call research, there's no bias, and this is extremely important. So based on all this information, based on the situation we're in astrology, my basic point is that extreme case sampling is we can call it a blessing. It is just a huge asset to understanding astrology. And it's simple. What am I saying? Just look at people who have an extreme emphasis of some astrological variable, if it's a zodiac sign or an asteroid that makes aspects with very small words, set some criteria for an extreme astrology thing, and then whatever it is you're looking at, if it's Gemini or an asteroid or parallels of declination, anything, a particular aspect, those people that have that very, very strong must exhibit the qualities we expect. Now, have people been doing extreme case studies? Yes. I did a study on the first 32 harmonics. I'll pull it up on our website. Here's a little book I wrote. It's free. You can go to our website. Let me see if we drag this down. You can see it's astrosoftware.com/harmonic first32.pdf. And, it's an entire book where I set a criteria for what would be a strong harmonic, and those people who scored at the top are the extreme people, and they must fit the meaning of the harmonic. Anyway, the book goes on and on and on with sample charts. Here's 17th harmonic, and we try to figure out what 17th harmonic means, or 18th, 19th, from 1 to 32, by just pulling out the charts that have the strongest of each harmonic. We set a simple rules for that, and we ran the software, ran the Sirius software, Sirius 1.3, which is what we're looking at here. This wheel, by the way, is a wheel in what we call the pastel collection. It doesn't come with the program. It's an option. But anyway, ran the Sirius 1.3 software, which has tons of charts in it, 40, 50, 60,000, I forget how many charts, and just told it go through the database and gave it, did the astrosignature research. I have another tutorial video on that. And that's it. It's very simple. Let me try to get back to my PowerPoint here. Let's see, pull up Sirius. Okay, so that's an example. I've also done this with the 12 zodiac signs. I've given a lecture on it. I haven't published that information. I think it's fascinating, such as Steffi Graf and the Gemini. I did the research on Chiron, came up with some interesting ideas. And eventually I'll write papers and make tutorial videos on what we found out, another just looking at the extreme charts. I've also now working on what makes baseball players have outstanding batting performance by taking the best players. So very simple. All I'm saying is that just take extreme charts, base it on some criterion, and best thing to do is run it through the software to pick it out. Now, I'm going to finish this little lecture, I guess we can call it, with some quotes from some papers and books on research methodology. This will help us understand and appreciate extreme case sampling. Here's a quote from Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not an authoritative academic source, but their very first sentence, I think, captures the essence of this very nicely. I'll read it. It says, accidental sampling, also known as grab sampling, convenience sampling is a term I've always used for it, or opportunity sampling, is a type of non-probability sampling which involves the sample being drawn from that part of the population which is close to hand. That is, a sample population selected because it's readily available and convenient. In other words, it's what we do in astrology. We have a client, a famous person, that comes to our attention, and we interpret it. It's called convenient sampling. Now here, I put it in bold blue in the original at Wikipedia. Here's the address. Obviously, it's not big, bold, and blue, but I bolded it because this point is important. The researcher using such a sample cannot scientifically make generalizations about the total population from the sample because it would not be representative enough. So convenient sampling is not regarded from the point of view of research methodology as being, you might say, very impressive. There's nothing wrong with it in terms of you can use it, but you have to be very careful about it. On the other hand, extreme case sampling, you can generalize. In fact, here's an academic paper by, oops, I've got this, this should have been erased, sorry about that. Just read the first part of this. 5 misunderstandings about case study research. Oh, no, this is correct. Well, except for this last part. 5 misunderstandings about case study research by a guy, Bent Flivberg, I guess you pronounce it, in a journal called Qualitative Inquiry, blah, blah, blah. Forget this other part, it's not supposed to be there. Anyway, here's what he said in this academic paper. When the objective is to achieve the greatest possible amount of information on a given problem or phenomenon, a representative case or a random sample may not be the best the most appropriate strategy. This is because the typical or average case is not the richest in information. Atypical or extreme cases often reveal more information. This is what I'm saying, that you can do random sampling. It's a lot of work. It's you have to study a lot of data, etc. If you grab a small number of extreme cases, in astrological research, it's very, very good. And one of the reasons it's very good is because the extreme case method is exploratory. It is a way of probing possible causes. So with this exploratory research, you can look at the chart and you can say, gee, let me study these people with all this Gemini. And you can use your skill as an astrologer, you're what we call a content expert, to play with ideas and come up with probable relationships for what an astrological variable means. This is a respected and it's a respected research method because you can generalize, from extreme case studies. Because one of the reasons is because there's no selection bias. You don't get to say, well, I just happen to be looking at these charts. You must use the charts that, when you run through the software, come out very strong in whatever it is you're studying. So it's a way of probing possible causes of Y, that means the behavior, or the X, which means the astrological variable. So you can use extreme cases meaning the extreme astrology, or extreme behaviors such as baseball players who were on the all-star team would be extremely good baseball players. So you can use it for both the independent and dependent variable, as they're sometimes called, or in simple terms, the astrology in our case, or whatever type of behavior or trait we're studying. One or two more things that will be done here. Some research methodologists may say, you can't do that. You can't just generalize based on extreme cases. Well, here's from a book by these two individuals. Actually, no, this is a research paper in 2008, and I'll read this very quickly. Wright and Gerring, they say selecting cases on the dependent variable is indeed problematic if the researcher treats the resulting sample, the extreme case, as if it were representative of a population. However, this is not the proper use of the extreme case method. Note that the extreme case method refers back to a larger sample of cases lying in the background of the analysis. Well, if that went over your head, don't worry about it. The point is this. You can generalize from extreme cases, is what it's saying, and it's just a technical issue in thinking about what we're doing when we do extreme cases. So a lot of recent, fairly recent, over the last 5 or 10 years, academic papers and books are emphasizing the extreme case sampling works. You can get more information from it sometimes than you can from sampling. I think it's especially true in astrology, where we're still refining and validating that our ideas are correct, and make sure that they work with those extreme cases. And then if they do, you're in strong position to generalize what you found. By the way, here's an excellent lecture on selecting variables in data mining. It's called Feature Selection. And here's the website address, Isabelle Guyon, Introduction to Feature Selection, which is part of what we're doing here, picking out which variables are the most important. But anyway, that's a very good video on related topic of how to do research, exploratory research. So, to conclude, extreme case sampling is highly recommended for astrological research. That's putting it mildly. In other words, doing convenient sampling, which is what we usually do, really is so limited that if you take the step to do extreme case sampling, you can really test, evaluate, and develop your ideas much faster. So go ahead and do extreme case sampling. You're looking at charts, don't ignore them. Continue to look at your chart, your friends, and your colleagues. But when people say, I use whole sign houses, or I use these orbs because look at my chart and look at these other few charts, that's a starting point. The next step according to modern research methodologies, would be something like extreme case sampling, and then be able to explain those charts. If you can't do that, you got a problem. And if you can do it, you're probably well on your way to having a really solid theory that works consistently. So extreme case sampling seems to be getting a little more attention from research methodologists, which I'm glad. I think it's very, very powerful. And the big thing is it's relatively easy to do. It's fast and it's efficient. So you can do it by yourself and you can get good results. And we've done some studies and planning to make a lot more. And this is kind of an introduction to why I think these tutorial videos will be so important. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening. God bless. Namaste.